Hi, it's the 3 Minute Sociologist again. This time I'd like to take a look at some of the social theories we've been talking about in the course and that you've been reading about. There are many in sociology, but we'll probably look at three: structural functionalism, conflict theory, and interactionism or symbolic interaction. But today I just like to look at functionalist theory, start out with. Now remember, all these theories are here for the purpose of trying to make some sense out of what's going on in human interaction. They're not always right, they're not always perfect, but they might give us a little roadmap for understanding. And each of these theories we'll talk about is a distinct picture of what may happen and how. So let's first start with functionalist theory. Just take the words themselves: functionalism or structural functionalism. The idea that something exists because it's functional is pretty much central to that kind of thinking. You got to start out with a basic assumption that society is a set of interdependent parts. Let me give you an example of an analogy. Now, these are never perfect, okay? But how is society like this ink pen? I've got, well, that's really not a system. I mean, you would probably agree that all these parts are part of a system, but the way they are configured in my hand, they really don't do much. Now, each of these parts, a spring and then the ink, its cartridge itself, and then the two parts of the external hull, have some function. And you'll notice that if you look at an assembled pen, this one, it's organized in such a way that it fits in your hand so you can write with it. In a sense, those interdependent parts create a whole system, something that we like to call a pen or a writing instrument that can be used in a hand for the purpose of writing. It's structured in a way that can be used for writing, and it's functional because we can do something with it that we need to do. Now, that's a simplistic example, but in many respects, society is that way too. If you think about the institutions in society, family, government, religion, economics, education, and a couple others, you become aware that those parts, in and of themselves, are not really what we do in society unless we put them all together. They each have an independent function, but when we put them all together, they serve the larger societal needs. Now, not perfectly, but nonetheless, we make an effort. And it turns out that unlike this ink pen, which probably doesn't change a whole lot, societies undulate constantly. So this thing would be morphing constantly if it were truly an accurate analogy with society. Now, if you start out with the assumption that society is a set of interdependent parts and it's a system, an interdependent set of parts, then you'll choose some situation in that environment, like, say, health care, providing health care for a nation, or even providing health care for your family. Suddenly then you start talking about, well, what are the needs of that situation? What are the needs, the healthcare needs of a society of 300 or 400 million people? Thinking of a China of 1.3 billion people. Is there a social system that can be structured in such a way as to meet the needs of the United States in terms of healthcare? And then to move from there, okay, let's think about this as a system. Given our cultural values, the norms and values around this system, how are we going to organize that healthcare system to adequately meet the daily healthcare needs of the people within that society? Very often it's helpful to think in terms of, well, all right, what systems do we have now? What are the parts that are currently available? How do they function? What are the relationships between, say, healthcare and government, between healthcare and economics, between healthcare and the family? How are those parts interdependent? How do they work? Of course, as you know, as one thing changes, so also do the other parts in the system change. So you can't really change government's impact on healthcare without changing family, religion, and other social systems as well. And then last but not least, once you have this imagined, say, diagram in your head of a functionalist systemic model, then you got to ask yourself, all right, what are the gaps between what we need and what the system provides? Therein lies the basis for shortcomings in systems, changes in systems, and the sort of slow evolution of a societal system in a functionalist model to try to adequately meet the needs. Just think for a minute. The United States is a very different society now with in terms of not only diversity and in population size, but also in terms of the way we deliver healthcare, both technologically, organizationally, and in terms of the number of people we need to see. The organizational system constantly is in an effort to try to meet those needs in a functionalist model, trying to reach some kind of system equilibrium or balance. Now, it doesn't always do that, and sometimes we can't even tell whether it's doing it. But in large, if we think about the social system this way, it's one way to make sense of why things are happening. Now, notice here, we're not necessarily thinking about the personalities of the people. We're not necessarily looking at this at an individual level. We're looking at this as a human construction of societal parts interdependent on one another. Well, that's an overview, albeit short, of what functionalism might be. Take a look at it, think about it, and see if you can apply it to any situation at a micro, that's person to person, a meso, an organizational level, or a macro, societal level. Take care. Have a good one.